If you'll grab the beige insert and make sure your neighbor has one to share. There may not be enough to go around. We'll sing Be Thou again. This is a chant adapted from St. Columba, Celtic saint, that I set to music a few years ago. And we just did during the prelude. So let's sing it again. And I'd like to refer to it when we talk about saints, St. Francis and St. Clare today. Because saints are people who we could say are living prayers. People who are living prayers. People who aspire to be that which they pray for by being aware of God's presence. So this is a song about God's presence. It's an echo, so you can go. Just repeat. Be thou bright flame before me. Be thou North Star above me. Be thou smooth path below me. Be thou shepherd behind me. Today, tonight, and forever. Repeat. Today, tonight, and forever. Be thou bright flame before me. Be thou North Star above me. Be thou smooth path below me. Be thou shepherd behind me. Today, tonight, and forever. Today, tonight, and forever. Nice. Hello, friends.
Hello.
It's really good to be here with you and really good to be outside. Yeah, my grandson, he said amen. Be a bright flame before me. For me, it's about the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God being present. Saints are able to bring the invisible to be seen. In Richard Rohr's words, the visible world is an active doorway to the invisible world. And the invisible world is much larger than the visible. This is one way of describing the mystery of the incarnation, our core belief, the story of Christ. This is the bright flame of truth. For Jesus is the ultimate example of the invisible, the world of grace, divine love becoming part of this world, the material, grace incarnate, grace in flesh, grace embodied. So Christ becomes this guiding star, this North Star. Be thou a North Star above me. And Francis and Clare were amazing at reorienting, like the Magi, reorienting people in the church back to the original long-lost street called the gospel. In Rohr's words, the long-lost street called the gospel. Saints lead us back to a radical simplification down to what's most important. So this is the reason grace can be a smooth path. Verse 3, it brings us home. Be thou a smooth path below me. But let's be clear. Smooth doesn't mean easy, right? Francis and Clare worked hard spiritually, but their burdens were lifted because they had this guiding principle. This guiding principle that had informed them about what they did, how they lived. The good path became smooth because it was the clear path. It was the meaningful path. It was the life-changing path. So in this sense, Richard Rohr says they were true conservatives. They were radical in their conservation of the gospel. That is the good news that this love that Jesus spoke of is very real, and we conserve it. We honor tradition by continuing to grow, to love God, to love ourselves, and to love others, especially those who are hurting, who have been hurt, who are hurting still. The spirit of the church, the community, is more important than the institution. That's one thing the saints teach us as they push against the institution. Go back to the gospel. What are the core values of the tradition? And do we live our prayers? How do our lives reflect our prayers? For Francis and Clare, they knew it was God's intimate love and care for every person, and indeed for all of life. The earth, the animals, the air, the sun, the moon, it's all holy. The visible world is imbued, is part of God, is part of God's invisible mystery. So they surrendered to that realization. Kenosis is the Greek word that Paul used. They emptied themselves. They emptied themselves of anything that was getting in the way of how they cared for others. Getting in the way of that radical simplification of love. Hence their embrace of simplicity. Bypassing material wealth, bypassing worldly power. Because power itself came from the ultimate source of truth, and that's God. So they knew Christ was the shepherd behind them, inspiring them to move, to have compassion, to sacrifice a normal way of living for an extraordinary way of living. Be thou a shepherd below me, today, tonight, and forever. A flame, a star, a path, forever. And so our prayer is, God, help me to be prayerful in my actions. Help me to be compassionate, because compassion leads to justice, and justice to change, to a radical new beginning. So let me end again by saying and being clear that the saints made hard choices. They weren't born saints. They struggled, they suffered, and they still made choices for a life of sacrificial love, of mercy, of simple compassion, of peace, above other desires. Just like the parents of Juliet who's to be baptized today, just like her parents will sacrifice for the love of that child. God calls us to love each other in that way. You know, when Francis, later in life, he wrote some things down, but it's noted that he could have written a lot more things down. He could have written about the time he met the Pope or the time he met the leader of the Muslim faith. He could have written about a lot of things, but he wrote about his conversion, his choice to choose God and love. You remember as a young man, he was a warrior. He was in the army, and he was seriously wounded and recovering from the wounds of war for a long time. We could probably say today that he had PTSD from that experience. And so he struggled at that time. Obviously, this is before he was known as a saint. He was in the midst of that difficult struggle. And he was angry, and he had resentments. And some of the people that he did not like were lepers, people who were diseased, people who begged for alms. He hated them. I imagine that for him, they were a symbol of weakness, the weakness of humanity. He was human in that way. But eventually, obviously, somehow by the grace of God and by his choices, he knows that he is diminished by what he experienced, the trauma of war. And he made a decision not to be diminished. He made a decision to surrender to the unconditional love he came to see in Jesus the Christ. So in this surrender, he was transformed and empowered. He was, instead of transmitting his trauma, which often happens for people who are traumatized, we transmit the trauma. Instead of transmitting the trauma, he was transformed by God's love. What once was feared or hated became literally, he wrote, sweetness. Sweetness. The leper was sweetness because the leper taught him to surrender to God's love, and he was transformed. Despite extreme circumstances, he surrendered to love and was transformed internally, and then changed his outward behavior. He became sacramental. Pain, anger, fear became gratitude. And he was transformed. He saw with new eyes, and he lived the good news of grace. So let us make that our prayer today. As best we can, as human as we are, as angry as we sometimes get, as fearful as we sometimes get, let us make that our prayer today. To open our hearts to the reality of pain, of suffering, of fear, and the reality of God's presence, God's love, God's grace, God's strength, and the joy that is found in them. Can I hear an amen?
Amen. Amen.
So I want to end with a little echo song that Dan and Brita helped, that I learned this week at the clergy conference. And so this is an echo song, so please sing along, hum. I'm gonna let life move me.
I'm gonna let life move me.
I'm gonna let life stir me deep.
I'm gonna let life stir me deep.
I'm gonna let life wake me from an ancient sleep.
I'm gonna let life wake me from an ancient sleep.
I'm gonna laugh with the laughter.
I'm gonna laugh with the laughter.
I'm gonna cry with the tears.
I'm gonna cry with the tears.
I'm gonna love the rain as deeply as the sun when it clears.
I'm gonna love the rain as deeply as the sun when it clears.
Okay, let's sing it together. I'm gonna let life move me. I'm gonna let life move me. Stir me deep. I'm gonna let life stir me deep. Ancient sleep. I'm gonna let life wake me from an ancient sleep. I'm gonna laugh. I'm gonna laugh with the laughter. Cry. I'm gonna cry all the tears. I'm gonna love the rain as deeply as the sun when it clears. The last line. I'm gonna love the rain as deeply as the sun when it clears. Amen.